Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Micro-Frontends in the trenches. Today I have my good friend Ruben that I met, I would say, a few years ago, Ruben, by
Yes,
now,
that's right.
when he was working in American Express. And if you don't know that, American Express was one of the first big corporates that were working with Micro-Frontends, and they even built a Micro-Frontends framework that was server-side rendering, client-side rendering, hybrid, more or less. Very interesting approach. But Ruben, how are you today?
I'm doing amazing. So thank you for inviting me, Luca. Nice
No,
to have a
it's
chat.
absolutely. It's great having you. So, as I ask everyone if they can introduce themselves and tell us where you are at in your micro-frontend journey, what you are working on, and so on and so forth. So, please take the stage and start to share your wisdom.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, my name is Ruben Casas. You gave a pretty good introduction. I have been working with Micro-Frontends for a few years now, and the first place where I started working with them was at American Express. I was part of the core team building the React Micro-Frontend framework. And it was a really excited project. But then I left my American Express and I went to solve another problem, another challenge, which is where I am right now at Postman. And I am an engineer at Postman working there, trying to solve a lot of interesting problems, sometimes with micro frontends. So I would love to share what the experience I had, the challenges, the tips, all of that. That's what we are here for.
Absolutely. And we will be all ears. So let's start exactly with that. What was the reason why Micro-Frontends was chosen as architecture for Postman? And maybe also
Yeah.
if you can tell us what Postman is, because maybe there are people that are not aware of.
Yeah, of course, and actually, this is a good segue because micro frontends is a front end kind of architecture, and the thing with Postman is back end developers love Postman, front end developers only know Postman as like a client, a REST client,
Mhm.
but Postman is more than that. Postman is an API platform, so you can imagine like collaboration. Like we sometimes call it like the Figma for APIs. So if you create Figma for your designs, you'll be using Postman to create your APIs design. So now it's an interesting application because it has a lot of complexity. We have a web application, we have a desktop application, and the company has grown really fast. So with growth, with more developers, you all know the drill. You know what happens. Things start, growing and growing, and the monolith starts getting really slow. So I joined Postman to solve a very specific problem. And so it wasn't like we have chosen micro frontends because of the sake of it. We know that's not the right approach. So the right approach is to start with the problem. So we have a problem, and let's examine the problem and how we're going to solve the problems. And one option would be micro frontends. But you will see as we go deeper into the details and implementation is micro frontend is not the silver bullet solution. And actually, I created a diagram last year where I can show like the evolution of where you can start from the monolith and go up this progress or going up, trying different things until you solve your problem. And at the end of the spectrum, we have micro frontends where you have fully decoupled distributed system. But sometimes your problem can be solved in the middle with many different techniques like modular monoliths, monorepos, etc. So I would love to share all of that. But yeah, that's the background on where I joined Postman and what problem we're trying to solve. And the main problem we're trying to solve is coupling and scaling the team, basically.
So once again, you're not the first guest that is talking about this challenge of massive scale and trying to untangle the complexity of an organization and using an architecture for helping to do that. So can you tell us a bit more about how you are structured team-wise in Postman?
Yeah, team-wise, we call them the squads, and it's basically teams are own different parts of the application. And those squads are responsible for their part. The problem is the application was, as many other applications, like startups, when they start growing up, application was one. And something that I love to say is, this was created by one person, now is maintained by a team. And that's a challenge because the code that was written, when it was written, it was not written with a team in mind. it was written by a small team or just one person or two people. And now the organization grows, and then you add more teams and more developers and more people to the organization. And then you realize, well, the code does not match the organization. And we will have a problem there because, okay, who owns this? Who maintains this? Who wrote this? And we developers like to, we always are proud of our code, but we always bash previous people's code, saying, who wrote this stuff? But the thing is, that's how companies evolve. That's how companies grow, and that's where we are right now. And we really appreciate, and this is a tip for any architects or developers, please really appreciate the shoulders of giants you're standing on. That code that you can say, oh, that's rubbish. Well, that's why you have a job, and that's where you are. So first of all, appreciate that the code that was written in a different context and in a different time of the company might not be the best right now because the company has evolved. Doesn't mean that code was bad or it was written in a different context. Now, that's the first challenge. Like that code does not match the organization, and the organization is now at conflict with the code and conflict with the architecture, because we want to grow, we want to move faster, but the architecture there does not allow you to do that because it's not being written, or is the architecture not being designed for that scale, for that fast iteration, and for the team structure of having multiple developers with multiple teams working on the same code base.
I think you touched a very interesting point here, saying the code was written in a certain context. And I think, let's say, it's extremely important to highlighting the fact that these context matters. Everything that we pick from other companies that maybe are at the forefront or the bleeding edge of specific technologies might or might not matter for our context. And maybe even taking one by one, like for like you will be used to see for other companies that maybe people are saying, oh, we take this architecture because working, I don't know, Netflix or Amazon, whatever. And maybe it's like a tiny startup trying to implement that. It might not work as expected, or there is too much overhead. I think what you highlighted about the context is a real important point and key point for understanding software architecture in general, not only for Micro-Frontends.
And on that, I would like to add something else. So that's why Micro-Frontends are very, very difficult, because they are very, very business and context specific, like microservices, etc. So when someone says, I want to adopt Micro-Frontends because I saw they work somewhere else, as you mentioned, it's very difficult because it might work for them because it's an organizational problem. And if you're trying to ship a solution for organizational problem, well, that's not your organization. Every single organization is different. And going back to my first experience with Micro-Frontends at Amex, we tried to open source this framework. We worked on the open source version of the framework, and we only had a lot of people with interest, because at that point module federation it was very new. I don't think it even existed when Amex had this framework. And they were trying to find a solution for one problem, a technical problem. And the framework that we designed, that Micro-Frontend framework, was solving a particular technical problem, which was sharing JavaScript at runtime. That's the problem that was solved from the technical perspective. But it was designed for American Express, and it had a lot of things that were specific to them. It was a lot of the stuff that was business specific to solve their problems of scaling, etc. So they were coming to me saying, can I use this? And I was like, yes, feel free to use it. But caveat, it is solving a problem very specific to this company who created the framework. So if you want to use it, just bear in mind that might not solve your problem, that your company problem might be completely different. So be very, very aware of that. And I had a lot of people very interested on using this. And I think this is a problem with Micro-Frontend frameworks in general, because it's very, very hard to get a technical solution that adapts very well to other business use cases. So the technical part has to be very well designed so it can be applied to multiple use cases, and you don't have problems with, I don't want to call it vendor lock-in, but there's always that part where you are using a framework and then you start finding, the 80-20 rule. It works great for the 80%, and then 20%, the challenges are just too difficult for that framework. That's going to cause too many problems when you try to implement it. So yeah, that was an interesting segue on my previous work at American Express and how Micro-Frontend frameworks are hard. Trust me, from someone who was working on one of them. Very hard.
No, I agree with you. I think in general, it's always a trade-off, and we need to find the right balance of our decisions, and therefore not being afraid to challenge ourselves in previous decisions, because the context of today is not the context of tomorrow. So that definitely is a good insight. But let's get back into Postman. So you started with let's say, a single person working on this project. Now you have one or multiple teams. So tell us a bit more, because I presume that you move towards a migration towards, let's say, a different strategy for handling your code base.
Yeah, so let's talk about two things. First, the complexity, and second, migrations. I would love to talk about migrations, and actually, I'm really need to find time to write some blog posts about migrations, because they're hard. So first of all, what problem we're trying to solve? So the problem that we were trying to solve was, apart from the organizational structure and growing, is the code base was deeply coupled, like incredibly coupled. There was just too many things, no boundaries, nothing, it was just growing organically, and it grew really, really out of control. So that causes a lot of problems. And one of the biggest problems that it causes is performance, but it also causes problems of reliability, because you are touching too many places. It causes problems with developer experience. So all of those problems are the ones that I'm trying to solve. And we realized that we had to use a different approach, and we had to decouple this when we were thinking about developing the VS Code extension. So as I mentioned, Postman is a product that has multiple platforms. So we have the web application, the desktop client, which is based on Electron, and then we wanted to ship a new product in the VS Code extension. We wanted to put Postman in VS Code, and when we decided to look into that, we were like, okay, VS Code has a really good ecosystem of plugins, and we can use web technologies. And the whole point of this is that we wanted to use the same technology, the same React and everything JavaScript to power the different experiences, so we can maintain the single code base. What we realized is, well, actually, the VS Code extension is very difficult to do that, because they're very VS Code is very performance sensitive, as we know. We need to make sure that it starts very quickly, and also we just wanted to put a subset of the application into the VS Code extension. We just wanted to put the API client. Now, when you have a deeply coupled application, then that is impossible. We tried to put the application inside the plugin, the VS Code extension, and well, guess what? That doesn't work, because you cannot just ship the entire application. You need to cut it into smaller pieces and modules. And this interesting thing with VS Code extensions is that you have like different iframes into the different slots. So if you imagine your VS Code editor, the sidebar is an iframe, the different tabs are an iframe. So you cannot ship the application unless you slice it, unless you cut it into smaller modular pieces. So that was the point where we were like, okay, the architecture that we need is different. We need to cut this into smaller pieces, independent applications, so we can ship the VS Code extension. So that was the reason we found that, I mean, the term micro-frontend is a bit also, we divided application into modular reusable pieces that can be deployed independently, correct? But the independent deployability is an option, was not the target, or was not the main reason we went with this. Then our main reason was we wanted to make it more modular. For other companies, independent deployability that's the main reason why they go to micro-frontends. But for us, was more like the modularity and decoupling of the application into smaller pieces.
Makes sense. Okay, so that's a very solid, I would say, argument on trying to, let's say, look into micro-frontends. I imagine that when you started with this assessment, you also thought about maybe libraries or other ways to modularize your code. And if so, what was the reasoning to move towards micro-frontends over other approaches like NPM libraries or whatever?
I think the key here was NPM libraries are good if you want to do build-time composition. One thing that we wanted to ensure was to leave that door open for runtime composition and independent deployments. So the problem with the libraries is that, yes, everybody was using libraries. They're difficult to maintain in terms of we business logic wise, coordination, etc. And also the one advantage of having runtime composition is that you can have a separate module graph. And this is something that people don't realize, that when you have a single monolithic application, if you are using Webpack or any bundler, you are shipping an entire module graph. And performance-wise, I discovered something very interesting, and is that the larger the graph, the more CPU-intensive the JavaScript parsing and compilation becomes. So one thing that we realized was like, actually, if we divide the application not just into code and deployment boundaries, but also the module graph is divided, we realized that could give you a little bit of performance boost. At least you are not compiling and transpiling everything into one single gigantic module graph. And in terms of Webpack, we're still using Webpack. So that was one of the reasons. And also, of course, independent deployability is still a feature and it's important. It was not the main feature for us, but it was something that we want to leave the door open for the future. Okay, so that was mainly the reason why we decided to go with runtime composition instead of build time composition.
I would say there is another thing, at least in my experience, I would like to understand if it was the same for you. That when you let's say design things with Micro-Frontends, you force a certain behavior to look into boundaries. So that when you are dealing with libraries or modules, it's more emerging let's say the type of a slice that you make. Instead, with Micro-Frontends, in my opinion, you are forcing the behavior of stopping everything and real assessing if you are heading towards the right direction and trying to understand what's the boundary, what's the contract or whatever. While in libraries is less so, is less more dedicated to the let's say developer seniority or developer mood for deciding how a specific library will interact with another one.
Yeah, and we wanted to be very strict in terms of those boundaries. I mean, you can achieve boundaries very, very well with monorepos. I love monorepos. I'm using NX. It's a great strategy, and you can create these code boundaries that you can do. The enforced boundaries plugins from NX is great for you to prevent that. However, this basically will prevent you to importing code even if you skip the boundary. Like if you say, oh, let's just comment the ESLint rule because we need to ship something quickly. With module federation and with the runtime composition, well, guess what? You cannot do that because that module graph is completely encapsulated and deployed independently. So you cannot accidentally or intentionally import a module or an NPM package because it has been completely isolated and decoupled and distributed in a way that the business logic is encapsulated. So we wanted to be very strict. And we have both. So we have NX module boundaries plus we have the boundary on the module federation different module graph as well.
Makes sense. That's pretty cool. So we were talking about migration. So you writing a blog post. That, by the way, if when you write, please let me know. You know that I'm always keen to share, let's say, great insight and stories in my newsletters. That said, let's talk about migration. So how did you approach the migration to Micro-Frontends?
Okay, so this is an interesting one, and let's have a little chat about this because migrations are hard. And let me say it again: migrations are hard, really, really hard. There are two or three curse words that you cannot mention when you are discussing this. One is migration, another one is rewrite, and another one is like refactor. Those three are like curse words if you go to a business setting, because it's very, very hard to convince like product partners to understand we need to do this. Like technology partners, we understand that refactorings, migrations, all of these things are sometimes required. So I knew this, and I was like, okay, I know that we cannot do. I mean, I don't know who in this day and age will recommend a complete rewrite. I mean, you'll be crazy if you do that. Sometimes it happens, and I heard stories. I was talking to someone recently that they managed to do a rewrite to Next.js, and I was like, "Good for you, man!" But that's not the rule. That's the option. That's the exception, right?
It's the edge case.
Very, very hard to convince someone to do a full rewrite. So I went in and not thinking, okay, we are not going to be doing a full rewrite. That's impossible. Not impossible, but that's not going to happen. So I designed a migration strategy that it was incremental. that it was better suited for the business use cases and to ensuring the things. But let me tell you what, that was not enough. So that's what I'm saying. Migrations are hard. So if you think that you're doing a migration strategy that's incremental, that might not even be enough. You might need to do something else. So my first tip, and we probably do tips at the end, is you need to be flexible. Like your architecture has to be flexible, and you need to align with the business to understand what the business requirements are. Because yes, Micro-Frontends and these architectures, they are great, but just remember, we are trying to solve a business problem, right? And we don't want to impact the business, and we don't want to impact it as much as possible. So we want to reduce the impact. So in terms of the migration strategy, always incremental, but incremental, there is a spectrum because as with micro-frontends can be really small or they can be big. The boundaries, there is no size for micro-frontends. They depends on the business. So the thing is, if you say, okay, we are going to reduce the blast radius and just migrate or refactor or whatever this particular micro-frontend, which we decided the boundary is and is kind of small, but guess what? That might be even too big because it's going to affect too many things. And especially in our use case, we have something called workspaces. Workspaces are like the place where you do everything in Postman. And that is basically the core of it. And even that boundary, that's too big. So we need to go more granular. But when you go more granular, then you realize that those things are also interconnected to other things that are going to be affected. So migrations are very hard. I recommend the migration strategy where you do. I have different like migration avenues, and this is why I presented. I have different options. I didn't come up with just one single. Here's what you're gonna do. This is the migration strategy. I came up with many options, and then choosing which one is the best one. Sometimes even combine them. So I'll give you an example of migration strategy. So one migration strategy that is very common is the reverse the strangler pattern. Yep. Like incrementally writing things. Well, the problem with strangler pattern is like you do incremental approaches, incremental inside out migration. So everything you come from the in, and then at the end you end up with something that is better. The problem with that is you only see in terms of performance, for example, you only see the benefits a little bit at the end. You get a lot of benefits here and there with independent deployability and developer experience. But if you still have the monolith, until you get rid of the entire monolith, you're not going to feel the performance impact in terms of the front end.
Yeah, totally.
So that was one approach. Another approach is the reverse triangle pattern. So what if we just get rid of the monolith entirely for certain URLs or certain path segments, and then that will give you performance impact straight away. Like the monolith is not loading, and then you start building that. That's great, but also it depends on how your application composition is. So what I came up with at the end was, okay, what we don't do, but just do both. So some of them will be strangle pattern, some of them will be reverse strangle pattern, and there is a third option, which is certain URLs will have both. So some of them will have the monolith being the host, in terms of module federation terms. Some of the routes will have the new architecture being the host. And internally, inside them, then we switch and swap the different modules internally. And I think that was the options, because if we went for one or the other on their own, we will not reach the business goals that we wanted. So those options are there. And now the technical part is the easier one. The convincing and telling people and working with people is the harder part, because you can have all this, but then what are the constraints? And we always like to work backwards from our constraints. So we have constraints in terms of developer capacity, constraints in terms of product that are coming to the market, and also coordination. Coordination is and priorities. So we have a lot of constraints. Even if you have a really good strategy, a really good migration strategy, the strategy and the technology is not enough. You need to do the coordination, which is the harder part. So I would love to expand more of those, what we call the migration avenues to Micro-Frontends. So there are many avenues that you can take that will solve the problem.
I agree with you. Just one note for everyone that you were mentioning host. The host is usually the application shell or the container app or whatever it is you want to call it. But in Module Federation, you call it host. That's the vocabulary used there, just to punctualize on that. But the one thing that I think is very important to highlight here is that there isn't one way to do migrations. That I think you highlighted very well, because obviously sometimes you want to look into the metrics that are, let's say, they're improved through the implementation of Micro-Frontend. And I believe, and I would like to spend like a couple of minutes on that, that for sure, when you were deciding which kind of strategy you were using for the migration, you have, let's say, gather a baseline and then to see, okay, so before was working this way, now we improve by X, this specific metric, I guess.
Yes. So in terms of metric, we try to align the metric to the performance, because our monolith is not just causing problems with velocity and organizational problems and developer experience problems, but it's also causing a big performance problem. So we try to align this to performance. The thing is, when you have two different like motives or different motivations to do something, you might get issues with alignment as well. Because what's the goal? Is the goal solving the performance problem? And is the micro-frontend architecture the best way to solve the performance problem? It is one way to solve it, but at what cost? So when you try to figure out what your migration strategy, you need to have your goal very clear. So what are you trying to solve here? Are you trying to solve for the future, to have stability in your architecture, a better architecture, developer experience, etc.? Or are you solving a particular problem? So for us, a particular problem that we were looking at was performance. And we did. We solved the performance problem for the VS Code extension. So VS Code extension starts immediately. We just, every time that you open a new tab in the VS Code extension, that spins up a new micro-frontend that opens just that part of the application that we require. And we solved the performance problem. So we can see that was fixed. Now, the thing is, can we apply the same approach to the main desktop and web applications? Well, maybe not, because we might have different constraints. We have a larger code base. We have a larger impact. It's very different to do migrations when you have a new product, to do migrations when you have a mature product that you cannot break. And this is the thing, like you cannot break the product. Second, you cannot remove features, because the features are being used by everybody. And if you remove a feature, you cannot reduce code by removing features. And those are the constraints. So when we're thinking about migrations, we need to figure out what problem we're trying to solve, and is that problem aligned? Performance is one very common, because I've talked a lot to a lot of people, and when they do migration, not just for micro-frontends, and they have some business metrics, that's how they sell it. And I remember one of the episodes, I was listening to your podcast, and how to sell micro-frontends to your boss, and how to prove that with data and showing this is the metrics. These are the metrics that are improving the business by implementing this architecture, and that's one way. So you need to find that one, but just make sure that micro-frontend is not the only solution for that problem, and be careful with that. Because if you say, oh, micro-frontends or this architecture is the only solution, you might get in trouble, because, well, it's not the only one. Have you explored any other solutions? Are all those other solutions better for this particular problem in terms of performance, for example? And micro-frontends, they're still good, but they are tackling a different problem. They're tackling the organizational, developer experience, stability, and future-proofing of the architecture. So that's what I recommend people to just figure out what you're trying to solve, and ensuring that if you are going to put business metrics, that you don't go there saying this is the only option, because there are many options.
I fully agree with you. Funny enough, yesterday I had like a consultation with an American company that they asked me if their ideas of using Micro-Frontends would make sense. At the end of the call, after, let's say, understanding how the things were working and what they were trying to optimize for, we ended up saying, oh, probably an NPM library for this specific chunk of the system is good enough to begin with. And then if in the future you feel the need of, let's say, more advanced solutions solution for different deployment, which was a multi-tenant approach on their system they wanted to have. But sometimes Micro-Frontend would work, and some other times for what they need to do, because it was very tiny, probably was more a burden than a benefit for in that case. So totally, I agree with your suggestion on let's say cherry pick the right bottle, and is not always going with an absolute truth that is use that or this other approach. So you spent a lot of time with model federation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so tell us a bit more about that. So how do you find it? If a person that is listening is looking into module federation, would you recommend it? There are more benefits and drawbacks. So tell us a bit more about that.
So I'll say module federation. One of the reasons I like it, and we had this chat. I remember chatting with you a while back, and I was saying, talking about reversible decision versus non-reversible decisions. The reason I love module federation is because it's kind of a reversible decision, or at least an easier decision to reverse compared to other micro-frontend frameworks. Because, basically, if you were to get rid of module federation, you just need to go and update some imports. And you need to go and change a couple of settings in terms of how things are shared. So it gives you that option to, okay, we are not changing the routing structure. We are not changing how we are touching very, very small places. It's a very good primitive, if I would say. It's something that you can try it out, implement it, see if you can deploy something independently. But guess what? The code base has not changed. The code base is the same. Like module federation just encapsulates your code and deploys it at runtime. Like you can consume it at runtime. And he does a lot of really cool things with sharing dependencies. Sharing dependencies is probably one of the biggest problems with micro-frontends, as well as sharing state. I'll say sharing dependencies is very difficult because if you're not careful how you share your dependencies, you either have problems with performance or you have problems with things breaking at runtime. And actually, that was one of the things that I was really that I didn't like about module federation. But guess what? They updated the sharing, and now you can basically select whatever library you want, and it's always predictable. So my main concern with module federation at the beginning, when it first came out, was the sharing of dependencies was a bit unpredictable. Like you could end up with an unpredictable system. And that was fine for some companies, but some companies who wanted some predictability and didn't want surprises runtime in production, that was a deal breaker for them. But good news for everybody who tried module federation 2 years ago and they didn't like it because of the shared feature was random. Well, now you cannot make that. It's not random anymore. You can just basically say, I want these versions of this application at runtime, and every single micro-frontend will use that version no matter what. And this is going to always be picked up from the host. That's amazing. That was one of the best updates to module federation's history. That happened in 1.5, and now I know module federation is now 2.0. That was great, because that was the only thing that was like, okay, this could be a really tricky thing to do with the shared API not being predictable. But it is now. So go and give it a go and try it. So yes, that's one of the, I mentioned the shared of dependencies is important for me. Also, that is very simple in terms of how you implement it. It's more complex when you want to do advanced use cases, when you want to do really clever stuff. But if you're starting, you don't need that. Like module federation is very complex for the advanced use cases, but it's very, very simple for most of the use cases, which I like. That you can start taking just what you need instead of taking a massive complexity that I don't need yet. So I love that about that module federation.
I think you touch a point that I always say to every single team I spoke with about module federation, that is what they call is transparent. So it enters inside your system very nicely, provides you a very nice developer experience. It solves the key problems that usually you have with Micro-Frontends. But if you want to take it away and doing your own way or with another framework, doesn't matter, it will allow you to do that. and even to pair with other frameworks like Joel, for instance, from Single SPA. In the documentation added also the integration with Single SPA and Module Federation. So it has that flexibility and that transparency when you are integrating your system, that it doesn't go in your way. That is a fantastic characteristic of Module Federation. I fully agree with you on that side, and very often is not highlighted enough. So thanks for raising that. Before we wrap up, because we are almost about time, right? Usually what I ask to everyone is, can you tell us your tips and tricks on how to start with Micro-Frontends or how to optimize for Micro-Frontends? Because, having people like you that built not once, but multiple times Micro-Frontend system is a blast for the community. So having people that really has the battle scars, that they have created something unique, something big at the big brand that you work for. So I'm sure you have like some great insights that everyone would like to know.
Of course. I mean, I mentioned some already, but I'll say start with the problem. Just make sure that you have the right incentive to implement this architecture. So architectures, as you say, they're always a trade-off. So there is no free lunch. If you're going to implement micro-frontends, it's going to solve one problem, and it might cause a couple as well. The complexity, distributed systems are hard. Migrations are hard. Distributed systems are harder. So I'll say I would recommend starting with the problem. So focus on what problem you're trying to solve and work backwards from there. Okay, so on my recommendations, again, look at I'll probably share that on the notes of the episode, is that diagram that I have where you can start from the monolith, and monolith is fine. I mean, if you have a monolith and you're working fine with the monolith and you're doing well with the monolith is great. So do not think that you will have to move away from monoliths because you have to. If you have a problem, then do it. Then start investigating. And start investigating, not just going to Micro-Frontends, because if you put the spectrum, what I like to call in this diagram is we have the monolith on one side, that is a single independent unit. And then on the far end of the spectrum, we have Micro-Frontends, which is a fully distributed system, which is very hard, by the way. As I said, distributed systems are hard. What people don't realize is that you can experiment in the middle with different flavors of what you want to do to solve your problem. So some people might just try doing something like a modular monolith. We have a lot of examples in the community for companies that have implemented modular monoliths effectively and that have solved the problem. And that was fine. Then you can have a mix of Micro-Frontends that are build-time composition, that you can integrate them with a monorepo. For example, monorepos are great because they solve a particular problem in terms of code organization and a kind of encapsulation and modularity. And then if you try all of these things and you say they don't fix the problem, then you can go and look at Micro-Frontends. Okay, what problem is the Micro-Frontend architecture solving? And the other thing that you can do is that you can move backwards and forwards. And that's going back to module federation. That's why I love module federation, because I can just create a monorepo and then I can integrate, for example, module federation into a monorepo to implement in runtime composition and independent deployments. But actually that didn't work. So I can just roll back and then just stay as a monorepo, and that will work fine for me. So making those reversible decisions, again, as I mentioned, you love that. I know you work for Amazon. You love the reversible decisions pattern. So as long as you can just move between those different steps in the architectural discovery, and then just roll back in terms of decisions until you solve the problem, you will be fine. You will be finding the best place. And remember, everything is a trade-off. So at different stages, we have different trade-offs. So as long as you assess those trade-offs and you ensure that you are solving the problem with the least amount of trade-offs, that's the holy grail. So you solve the problem with really cool architecture with the least amount of trade-offs. That's my equation. That's my recommendation for you today.
I like that. It's really pragmatic. I like the fact that you're talking with, let's say, real experience, and I can see from what you described that you are very balanced, and I think is a very important characteristic when we are designing system, especially distributed system, because it's difficult sometimes to let's say find that balance. And I can see from how you describe all your journey that you were really looking holistically holistically on the business problem and trying to solve with a balanced approach. So thank you very much for that, Ruben. I think it would be extremely helpful for everyone that is listening to this episode. So again, it was amazing having you. It was a nice chat. Like the time literally flew away. Hopefully I will be able to invite you later on. Maybe we can discuss more about the monorepo approach, because I think there are many people that would be interesting to understand more about NX and how, let's say, you can work with Micro-Frontends about that. But thanks again for being part of this show.
Awesome. Yeah, we had fun. I hope that was really helpful. Thank you for inviting me. I mean, we had chats before. This time with this chat, we are recording it, but
exactly.
That's the best part of, hanging out. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, so thank you everyone for listening, and see you in the next episode of My 50 Cents.